The Epstein files continue. We have a new memorandum in opposition to a motion to dismiss. The motion to dismiss is coming from an entity that doesn't want any litigation to continue against them. They are the subject of an inquiry from the U.S. government. It involves J.P. Morgan, and it involves this guy here named Jes Staley, the former CEO of Barclays, a bank from Britain that is sort of really involved in this because there were some spicy emails between him and Jeffrey Epstein involving some Disney princesses. What? We're going to go through the memorandum, but here's just a quick excerpt. It says Epstein accounts the same about Eastern European women. What? In July 2010, Staley, that guy, emailed Epstein saying, quote, "That was fun. Say hi to Snow White." Huh? To which Epstein responded, "What character would you like next?" And Staley responded, "Beauty and the Beast." Huh? Were they going to Disneyland? What? All right. So that's the memo we're going to look at. You can see here, we're going to go through the court docket in some detail. Before we read through the actual memo, this is from the government opposing the effort to dismiss the lawsuit brought by the government. So the government wants to keep this thing in court, and they are opposing the dismissal. But before we look at the details of those interesting and troublesome emails, let's learn a little bit more about this guy, Jes Staley, the former CEO of Barclays. And here's what Wikipedia tells us. They write that James Edward is named Jes Staley, American banker, stood down as CEO, was succeeded by somebody else, spent nearly 4 decades in the banking services, also spent 34 years at JP Morgan, ultimately becoming the CEO there as well. Problems arose. November 2021, Staley resigned amid a regulatory probe into whether he mischaracterized his relationship, with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, we covered the Maxwell trial at length here. We have the whole mind map and everything we went through. We have all of that organized if you missed that trial. However, this is not that case. This is another civil matter that's being investigated by the government of the Virgin Islands and JP Morgan. So a little bit more about him. A lot of money, a lot of time in the private sector, and there's a controversy between him and Epstein. Background, they say. In 2015, the Daily Mail published an article saying that they had seen emails between Epstein and the CEO. Epstein was arguing for Mr. Staley in financial circles, saying that he should be the CEO for Barclays, right? So they were sort of pals. Epstein was promoting this guy. Put him in charge of that, put him in charge of this. In February, they announced that there was an investigation into whether Staley was fit and proper to lead Barclays. Staley told Bloomberg that the investigation moved forward. And so there was a whole problem once these emails started to come out. What does Snow White mean? What do these different names mean? So a little bit of the background there, personal life and so on, we'll leave for another time. But I want to go through the court docket very briefly and show you sort of the technical components of this case because it has been going on for a little bit of time now. And if we start in the back, we have a summons that was originally issued. These are the parties who were involved, of course. We have the government of the United States, of the Virgin Islands, and JP Morgan Chase. So government versus JP Morgan. Government is suing JP Morgan. The summons was sent out. The complaint was sent out. A lot of it was actually under seal. We have different affidavits that are being filed. Different lawyers are submitting notices of appearance. We've got judges being sort of moved around. Pro hoc vice means that lawyers are sort of coming in from out of state. All of these different lawyers are coming in now. We have just a ton of motions for pro hoc vice. So you can see the list kind of goes on and on and on. Now we get several motions, and I'm looking for orders. And a motion, here you go. Here is the motion to dismiss. So as we get into this memorandum, this is where it basically starts. A motion to dismiss was filed by JP Chase Bank. They say there's no reason for this lawsuit to be here. It's a jurisdictional problem. There's nothing that we can provide to remedy this. You're barking up the wrong tree, in other words. So we have a bunch of some time goes by and there's a response and another memo. And so we're going to pick it up with the actual memo filed here on February 15th. This is the memo of law opposing that original motion to dismiss that was filed on February 6th. All right, so enough of the background. Let's get right to it. You can see 31-page filing. This is submitted from the government of the United States as plaintiff versus JP Morgan Chase Bank. This is a memorandum in opposition to Chase Bank's motion to dismiss, the motion that was filed back on February 6th. So a bunch of lawyers are now involved and they're trying to get rid of the case now. Filed February 15th out of the Southern District of New York. Table of contents. We'll fast forward through most of it, but you can see their defense in this case, which is the bank, JP Morgan, they're saying the government doesn't have an actionable claim. So the government is saying, yes, we do. The law applies to your conduct. We have standing. We do meet all of the elements of this type of an offense and so on. They say we've also got counts under the CICO laws. And we have a conclusion. So let's go through it. They give us the table of authorities, and then we start with our first redaction right out of the gates in the introduction. They write, for 2 decades, this is the government speaking, for 2 decades, defendant JP Morgan Chase Bank facilitated and sustained Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking by handling and something his payments to young women and girls who were his victims and recruiters. Ooh. JP Morgan, the bank, facilitated Epstein's trafficking of victims and recruiters? Holy moly. The bank? And this is the government speaking. Let's just take a quick look at who signed off on this puppy. Linda Singer, acting attorney general, pro hoc vice, acting attorney general, also pro hoc vice, coming in Virgin Islands Department of Justice. Yeah. Okay, so they're all from not in the Southern District of New York, but they're suing in the Southern District of New York. And a lot of lawyers are flying in on this. All right. So now that we know who is signing off on it, let's add some meat to the bones of this major allegation. They say that trafficking, we'll just forget the S word for YouTube purposes. The trafficking was the principal business of Epstein's accounts held by JP Morgan. And JP Morgan profited handsomely from the hundreds of millions of dollars in assets in those accounts, in addition to Epstein's connections and referrals of ultra wealthy and powerful clients, none of whom are sitting in jail yet. You know who is? Ghislaine Maxwell. Far from the so-called ordinary banking services that JP Morgan claims it provided to Epstein, JP Morgan broke every rule to facilitate Epstein's trafficking and to feed off of his wealth and connections. They say, in fact, in 2008, after Epstein pled guilty to felony charges for procuring children, conduct that is trafficking under the law, the expectation was that JP Morgan would cut ties with, or at least minimum, closely monitor this person who is now a convicted felon. You know he got convicted of a pretty serious crime. That doesn't raise any red flags for you, JP? No, they didn't. It did neither. Instead, and decided at the highest level pending Demon review, JP Morgan continued to facilitate and sustain Epstein's trafficking by making the payments, covering up the trafficking, including for many years after it no longer held Epstein's accounts, which predictably enabled ongoing and future trafficking by Epstein. They were the bank for the trafficking. Yikes. JP Morgan, through its head of private bank assigned to manage Epstein and Epstein's accounts, made multiple visits to Epstein's Virgin Islands residence where women and girls were trafficked. Only when there was nothing left to be gained upon Epstein's arrest and death in federal prison did blank, 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 redacted. Ugh. So they're saying only when there was nothing left to be gained did somebody probably start creating a separation between the entity and Epstein. Only then did so-and-so call somebody and cancel the account and then call the police or probably disclose something. And, then it all started to break out. But they don't want to tell us about how the source came about. So the government says, Accordingly, with all that out of the way, the government of the United States of the Virgin Islands brings this action seeking relief for JP Morgan's participation in the trafficking that took place out of the Virgin Islands. Throughout the decades when JP Morgan and blank and so handled Epstein's payments, Epstein lived in these islands and he is subject to our law. That's why they're getting involved. So JP Morgan, they write, tries to shift the blame for this onto the government. They say that the government had access to the same information that JP Morgan did. They're saying, well, you knew he was a bad dude. And they say, well, but redacted, we don't see that. And they're talking about some banking rules, right? The TVPA says you can't, as a bank, you got to be responsible, right? You can't just say, I didn't know where that money came from. No, I had no idea, that came from there. You're not allowed to do that. You say you have a responsibility. Unlike the government says you have other capabilities that we so-called don't have. Yeah, right. But they say JP Morgan had real-time knowledge of millions of dollars of Epstein payments. Many of those were being made to young women and victims. Who were the victims? JP Morgan also had real-time knowledge that Epstein was using accounts of his charitable organizations to pay off young girls. JP Morgan repeatedly identified evidence of Epstein's child trafficking and did nothing about it. They say here, JP Morgan identified something that's probably really juicy because we can't see what it is. JP Morgan had a more than close-up of Epstein's trafficking. They say there was a senior executive at JP Morgan assigned to manage Epstein and Epstein's accounts, who in this role had a close relationship with Epstein. In fact, they flew that guy to Epstein properties in the islands, hundreds of messages with Epstein from his JP Morgan email address in full view of JP Morgan, including with some photos of young women who discussed Epstein's provision of services to him during his travel on dates that closely corresponded with payments to the same young women. Oh my gosh. And discussed young girls or women procured by Epstein using the name of Disney princesses. Snow White and Beauty and the Beast, man. Ugh. Gross. So this banker, man, was really involved in his clients' lives, I guess. JP Morgan failed to avert and divert attention from its oversight is understandable. Yeah, because they don't want to get busted with different claims, right? The government is saying, we understand why you didn't report this to us, because if you would have reported it to us, we would have blasted you for violating all of these laws. TVPA, CICO, CFD, BPA claims. If you would have reported any of this, the whole web would have been unveiled, essentially. So they give us some factual background here, and these are the parts that we like. They write, between 1998 and 2013, so going back for a little history lesson, they say JP Morgan serviced approximately 55 related Epstein accounts, valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Pretty big bank account. You notice those. During this time, JP Morgan handled payments by Epstein to at least 20 young women or girls whom he trafficked and subjected to assault in the Virgin Islands and elsewhere. The payments had no conceivable relationship to Epstein's stated business interests. Epstein also withdrew hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash over that time from JP Morgan accounts, especially significant as Epstein was known to pay for massages, aka encounters, with young girls in cash. During this time, JP Morgan, the bank, also processed payments by Epstein totaling almost $1.5 million to known recruiters of victims of Epstein's trafficking enterprise, including the MC2 modeling agency, whatever that is. Among the recipients of these payments were numerous women with Eastern European surnames who were publicly and internally identified as Epstein recruiters or victims, including $600,000 to Jane Doe 1, a woman who JP Morgan's own due diligence reports stated Epstein purchased at the age of 14. Can you believe this? At the age of 14. And this case is basically dead, right? I mean, this is civil litigation taking place out of the Virgin Islands. This is outrageous. And they've got all of this evidence. And where are the other criminal prosecutions going on here? Who are all these purchasers? They got Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein's dead. That's it. Hundreds of millions of dollars floating around in bank accounts. What is our government prosecutors? What do they do over there? Oh, that's right. They're playing Where's Waldo for the J6ers. Got it. All right. Throughout its relationship with Epstein, JP Morgan's internal investigation teams identified evidence that he was engaged in trafficking, but nobody cared. He's worth a couple $100 million to your bank. In 2006, JP Morgan's Global Corporate Security Division reported that Epstein was indicted in Florida, felony solicitation of minors. 2008, Epstein pled guilty in Florida, solicitation of procurement of a minor, got the most insane plea deal that has ever been drafted in the history of plea deals. It basically immunized him, in my opinion, from future charges and prior charges. And in my opinion, it also immunized Ghislaine, even though the law didn't find it this way. It also immunized Ghislaine Maxwell and every one of his co-conspirators. It was the most insane plea deal you've ever seen. How did he get that? I have no idea. And it doesn't matter whether it was ultimately enforceable. The fact that a prosecutor gave it to him with the foresight that it could be enforceable is nuts. I don't know what this guy had over people, but something big. Pled guilty in Florida to solicitation or procurement of a minor for prostitution, became a registered offender. JP Morgan, they continued the relationship with Epstein even after his criminal plea was reviewed and approved. It was approved by the highest levels at the bank. In August 2008, an internal email states, quote, I would count Epstein's assets as a profitable outflow for '08, parentheses, 120 million or so? As I can't imagine it will stay pending Demon review. That's probably a very high level person. Yet the assets did stay. So-and-so, blank, 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 redacted. We don't know. Because somebody approved, I would imagine, that Epstein can stay. They don't want, in other words, they're saying I would count that we lose 120 million. I can't imagine it would stay. Yet it did stay. Why? Because so-and-so approved it. So-and-so said, well, yeah, we probably have to let that go. However, because it's like a risk, right? It's a risky chunk of money. So we got to let that go because we can't be his bank anymore because he's now a convicted sex offender and, felon. So not good. And somebody overrode that decision. So in 2010, JP Morgan's Risk Management Division discussed new allegations of an investigation of Epstein involving trafficking. Throughout 2010-2011, JP Morgan's Compliance and Security Divisions reported evidence of Epstein's engagement in trafficking, including his settlement of a dozen civil lawsuits and his payments of $1 million to the MC2 modeling agency that was engaged with Epstein in trafficking, luring girls on the pretext of providing modeling opportunities and careers. Any criminal charges for Epstein-related conduct here? I don't know. JP Morgan, through its senior executive, Jes Staley, the guy that we heard about previously, you remember him, this fellow right here, now comes into the picture. And we'll continue on with the memo. As soon as we become re-energized, and learn about our friends over at Field of Greens. Because, my friends, we're going to need to be fortified and healthy before we continue on in this memo, because it gets a little bit problematic. So make sure you're getting your nutrients. We'd all like to lose those leftover pandemic pounds and be healthy and vibrant. And how sick are you of all those weight loss ads and fad diets? We've all been there. We've all done that. They don't work. You know what does work? Eating 5 healthy servings of fruits and vegetables every day. You do that, and the weight would probably fall right off. But my friends, who has time for vegetables and fruits every day preparing it all? It's a lot of work. Instead, let's come up with an easy solution. right on your screen. It's called Field of Greens. Field of Greens is a science-backed formula, very specific fruits and vegetables you're not going to find in any other product. Proper nutrition reboots your metabolism so you burn calories faster and lose weight the healthier way. And Field of Greens is the only brand backed by a better health promise. Yes, you're going to look healthier, feel healthier fast, but the greater proof is going to come at your next doctor visit when your doctor looks at you and says, my goodness, you've lost weight. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. So my friends, let's go ahead and get you started. Go on over to fieldofgreens.com. Use code Robert, save 15% off. Don't forget to use that code and get your real organic superfood. I have mine. It's delicious. It comes with, this one has some caffeine in it. I have the one upstairs that also doesn't have caffeine in it. Tastes good going down, makes you feel great, and it's a great way to stay energized and feel vibrant all throughout the day at fieldofgreens.com. Don't forget to use code Robert. All right, and so Jes Staley is the CEO who is the subject of the new line of conversation in the memo. They tell us that JP Morgan, through Jes Staley, the former CEO, engaged in multiple visits to Epstein's residence on Little St. James, where the trafficking took place as part of its management of its relationship with Epstein. At the time of these visits, Staley was serving in the role of JP Morgan's head of private bank. He wasn't the CEO yet, which was dedicated to extremely wealthy clients like Epstein. JP Morgan assisted Staley to manage Epstein and his accounts for wealth connections and the referrals of ultra wealthy and powerful clients. Thus, Staley's entire job was to maintain a close relationship with Epstein so that his money, connections, and referrals would continue to flow over to JP Morgan. Keep him happy, man. He's got all sorts of referrals and $120 million in our bank. Between 2008 and 2012, Staley exchanged over 1,000 messages with Epstein from his JP Morgan email account in full view of JP Morgan, including those emails about his visits to the island. A December 2008 email shows that Staley was planning a visit to Epstein early January 2009. Around the time of Staley's visit, Epstein wired $2,000 from his JP Morgan account to a woman with an Eastern European surname. Well, that's weird. What's she doing involved in this? In late 2009, Staley emailed that he was visiting London. Epstein asked if he needed anything. Staley replied, "Yep." Period. Yep. Soon after, JP Morgan wired $3,000 from an Epstein account to the same Eastern European woman. Now, in July, Staley also emailed Epstein saying, "That was fun. Say hi to Snow White." To which Epstein responded, quote, "What character would you like next?" And Staley said, "Beauty and the Beast." Whatever that dude's into. So Epstein also emailed Staley photos of young women in seductive poses. Following the internal reports of additional law enforcement investigations into Epstein's sex trafficking in 2010 and 11, JP Morgan's response was to send Staley in 2011 to obtain Epstein's denial on which the bank hung its hat. So they're actually transferring money. And I don't know if these, if this stuff is also underage or if this is overage stuff. Like, is this general prostitution or is this trafficking in underage women? Either way, it's troubling. One of them is grossly criminal, right? And grossly, I guess my point is, I don't know if this Snow White thing is like a prostitution thing, if this is like an entity over there or what. But anyways, it's not good. The point is here, they say JP Morgan was at all times required by law to perform due diligence. They didn't do it. While Epstein was a customer, so-and-so and so-and-so did all of this. During this time, JP Morgan benefited from the wealth and the connections. Epstein helped and promised to help Staley recruit ultra wealthy clients. And that happened. All right. So Epstein brings this guy out and he just shoves a bunch of women, in front of him. And again, like, we don't know the details of this. I would imagine. Well, let's carry on before we come to conclusions. We'll get there. Epstein introduced Staley to the owner of Capital Management Company, one of the country's largest hedge funds. JP Morgan also subsequently acquired Highbridge, and that catapulted Staley's career beyond JP Morgan, right? So these guys are just sort of scratching each other's backs. In 2011, Epstein helped Staley to pitch the creation of a donor-advised fund, which would include an exclusive club, okay, with a minimum $100 million donation. Epstein continued trafficking and abusing young women and female children until his arrest in 2019. Oh my gosh. So $100 million donation to get into Epstein's exclusive club? It was only after Epstein's death in federal detention that so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so redacted. JP Morgan blanked that redacted. Don't know what that says. So JP Morgan's illegal conduct continued until 2019, caused repeated and continuous harm to the Virgin Islands and its residents. So $100 million was the entry fee, huh? So do you suspect that's what Bill Gates was paying, right, for all of that travel over there? $100 million bucks to be a part of that club. And we know what that was giving these individuals access to. Horrific. So here's the argument now. Now, a lot of this, of course, is going to be some heavy legal lifting. We'll try to fast forward through most of it. But they say the government pleads that we have an actionable claim. All right, they say, look, JP says, hey, first of all, we knew he was a risk. Yes, he was a felon. Yes, he was a predator. But that didn't cause any additional liability to our bank, right? The bank has to be solvent. And if the government comes and seizes $120 million of assets because Jeffrey Epstein, got those gains from illicit sex trafficking, that's a pretty big liability for the company, right? So they've got to make sure that their bank is solvent and none of that jeopardizes their ability to provide their services. So they said, no. We knew that Epstein was a potential risk, so we increased our liability. And that means that we were covering a potential loss. They say that's not true at all. There is no increased liability. They say that none of this stuff applies to you guys. And you see a lot of case law. So we'll just fast forward through most of that. They say even if the amendment did apply retroactively, the government says so-and-so, redacted here. They say JP is wrong about its post-enactment conduct. Yeah, and they say, so it's another standing argument. They say, okay, here's a little bit more. They say JP Morgan is wrong in saying that the government fails to allege that it knowingly facilitated the trafficking venture. Okay, so this is a little bit more analogous to criminal law. In criminal law, we talk a lot about the elements of a crime, right? And you talk about mens rea and actus reus. You have a mens rea, which is your mental state. Did you intentionally do the thing? Did you intentionally steal the candy bar? You said, I'm going to take this, put it in my pocket, and you walk out the door with it. You've got a mental state and you've got a physical act, right? Those two parts to this. Here you see a similar structure. Did you knowingly assist in a type of venture, a trafficking venture? The government alleges, and JP Morgan says, we don't meet those elements. We didn't hit those boxes. And the government says, yeah, you do. Government alleges that JP Morgan participated. They facilitated payments to women and young girls who were Epstein's victims and recruiters. You channeled funds to fund the operation, and you so-and-so and so-and-so redacted down at Epstein Island. They say JP Morgan's facilitation and redacted made the trafficking venture possible and allowed ongoing and future trafficking. So the government allegation on all four hit the boxes. And they're comparing this to an old case from, not an old case, but a 2019 case out of the Southern District of New York. They're distinguishing some cases. So they're saying, well, that case is different than our case. They have a Salesforce case here. They're also talking about, unlike Salesforce, here is different than Salesforce. And they're distinguishing the cases. They also say that JP Morgan acted with serious reckless disregard, that they would be engaging in commercial activities. Goodness. JP Morgan, they say, acted with knowledge or reckless disregard. So they either knew this was going on or they should have known it was going on and they just disregarded it and they did it recklessly. That he was trafficking. They knew that he entered his own guilty plea and they had many other law enforcement investigations forthgoing. In 2006, JP Morgan knew that Epstein was indicted, got federal charges, and they still continued to bank with him. They say that the complaint details other law enforcement investigations of trafficking. In a 2010 internal email, JP Morgan's risk management division wrote of new allegations. Okay, so somebody goes, oh man, Jeffrey got popped again. They say, there's a new investigation popping up. Are you still comfortable with this client who is now a registered sex offender? So risk management was concerned about it, but Mr. Staley really liked his time with Snow White that one trip in Europe. And can we just pause and say ultra shout out to Crystal Hart, who invited and gifted 5 memberships to our community. Thank you so much, Crystal, for doing that. Crystal Hart is in the chat. We've got new members now. To Jay Piers is in the house. Mads is joining us. We've got AI Be Damned is now gifted a membership. Let's Go and Luann McCleary all gifted a membership. And that's a good commercial for our memberships. Thank you for supporting the community and the work that we do here by becoming a member. We appreciate you there. And thank you, Crystal, for those very generous, lovely Friday gifts. So in March 2011, JP Morgan, their global corporate security division, reported that it was aware of numerous articles that were investigating Epstein. Apparently he was doing molestation. Not good. The same internal JP Morgan report pointed to derogatory information. Also talked about Jean-Luc Brunel, owner of the MC2 model management agency, luring children. All of them were, in the crosshairs of the government, but the bank just kept going. With respect to victims 18 and older, the law requires that a beneficiary of trafficking like JP Morgan had acted with fraud. The government alleges JP Morgan knew it was processing Epstein's payments and that these women were being trafficked, and that JP Morgan knew these payments had no conceivable relationship to Epstein's stated interest. Wow. That is a big statement, my friends. That is the government saying, we think we've got them basically red-handed. They knew where the money was going. They knew why the money was going where it was going. They knew that Epstein's excuse for the money was totally BS. And they knew because he had already been convicted for this type of stuff. And he had multiple investigations in other places. Nuts. We were always wondering, where was his money? And Chase Bank had it. It's crazy. After Epstein's arrest and death, JP Morgan acknowledged that receipts of payments may be victims of human trafficking. So in addition to consistent references to human trafficking, the government alleges JP Morgan's internal reports showed accounts of the MC2 modeling agency and Epstein luring victims. So the government infers that young women could have been lured by a modeling agency with a promise for opportunity. JP Morgan handled the payments and paid money to Eastern European women with Eastern European surnames and other recruiters. Many young women from Eastern Europe. So there's JP Morgan is making some positions. They say JP Morgan knowingly benefited from this. It was not just a casual or causal relationship. A lot of case law here. They say, okay, some jurisdictional stuff about the Virgin Islands and the sequence of his payments, participation. All right. And so let's fast forward through the rest of this into conclusion, our concluding paragraphs. A lot of this is pretty heavy stuff. All right. So they write, for the reasons set forth above, the motion to dismiss should be denied. And that was signed off on here by Linda Singer, who is in as pro hac vice representing the government. Filed on February 15th, 2023. So very shocking memo there that Chase Bank was essentially the bag man, or at least one of them, for Jeffrey Epstein, and that somebody who is sort of lower up, managed the private client sector, eventually was so close to Epstein that they were scratching each other's backs that they got him into the CEO position, and he was able to help Epstein, I guess, maneuver assets around from there. Pretty amazing. Of course, we'll continue to cover this case as well. The defense will likely reply to this response, and we'll see what they say. But spicy emails from Jes Staley over to Jeffrey Epstein talking about Snow White and Disney fairy tales. Ugh, gross. All right. And so, of course, we'll continue to cover that. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for liking this video wherever it is you're watching it. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.